I want to thank you for joining us for a very exciting presentation this morning on the 2030 workforce. We have a very special guest from Infor today, Mr. Marcus Mossberger, who is responsible for HCM strategy at Infor. And with that, I give you Marcus and Michael.
Crowd goes wild.
That's right. All right, why don't we go ahead and jump in. I'm Marcus, he's Michael. You can see the topics on the screen here. We're going to start by talking a little bit about what's happening today, because I think there are breadcrumbs being left, right? Some
Absolutely.
clues as to what the future is going to look like. And then we're going to talk about the future and speculate what's going to happen. Are we all going to have self-driving cars? Are we going to be eating meatless burgers and paying for those with Bitcoin? We'll see, right? And then what are the implications around the workforce? So I actually love to start with what's happening in the media and what people are talking about.
Absolutely.
And this time of year, very appropriate to be talking about Amazon, as we're all getting lots of brown boxes on our doorstep. So I read an article in the Wall Street Journal back in July about Amazon is going to spend $700 million to retrain their workforce. And let me tell you a little bit more about why. And this isn't exactly accurate, but this is a pretty good depiction of what's going to happen 10 years from now. So today, you order stuff online, and a human runs around a warehouse from Amazon and picks all of your items. They use a handheld scanner to scan all the items in, they throw it in a box, and it shows up on your doorstep. You fast forward 10 years, those same fulfillment centers that today have 100 people are going to have 3 people. They're going to have a security guard, a robot repairman, and an operations guy. And that's a bit of a, dramatic review of what that might look like. But you get the picture.
Yep.
We are looking at significant changes in how we operate in society. Amazon knows this in advance, and they're saying we're going to spend money now to ensure those 97 other people actually have opportunities. Do you want to be the robot repairman? If you do, we'll allow you to do that.
Yep. In 2018, globally, 4 million jobs moved into automation. They were eliminated through automation. So a lot of those right now are in developing countries, right, that are gathering technologies that perhaps we deployed in the Industrial Revolution or shortly after. But 4 million is a lot of people affected, right? So companies should really start planning now for what's going to happen, right? And that really starts with understanding what jobs are going to be moving to automation the soonest, and then planning on how we redeploy that workforce.
That's right, that's right. So the whole nature of work, I would argue, is changing, and it's changing dramatically. This year I had a chance to attend a variety of conferences, including the HR Technology Conference, and just wanted to talk about some of the trends that bubbled to the surface over the course of those few months where we had a chance to interact with thought leaders and industry analysts. And so there's definitely a lot of talk about technology, right? Artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, chatbots. And where we're seeing some of those actually used today, not science fiction in the future, are things like interviewing, credential verification, onboarding, time validation, even in the payroll and benefits space. And the other thing we're seeing is a lot of these HR technologies that historically have been created for HR professionals are actually being created for the extended workforce instead. It's for the frontline employee, it's for the contractor. Right? And so we're seeing a change in the mindset of why we're creating it. And then we're also seeing a significant number of people who have expressed that they don't feel like they have the skills or the training that they need to be successful in the future. So technology is definitely a point of emphasis in this space. I don't know if you have some thoughts on that immediately.
Well, and those are all the buzzwords, right? Everybody talks about chatbots, and every application is suddenly rebranded as an RPA vendor. And if you really talk to them, they're really leveraging probably some of their existing capabilities, right? And they're kind of taking like an Infor process automation and going, RPA, it's probably a hybrid of it. It really isn't true RPA, perhaps. Infor's Coleman is probably a great example of what's going to be Infor's RPA product. Artificial intelligence is annoying to me because, is there really artificial intelligence? Probably not. You can't interact with a computer on an emotional level quite yet. But there are, automations. Artificial intelligence is kind of annoying. It's more right now a wrapper, I think, for all the emerging technologies like chatbots and such. And chatbots are becoming commonplace, right? If you shop for a car, you get those annoying chatbots that pop up and say, how can I help you? You can't. Click, minimize. But if you think about your employees, right, they do want that ability at 1 a.m. to get simple questions answered, and chatbots are a great way to do that.
That's right. In fact, you mentioned that you can't have the emotional intelligence piece in the chatbot, but I went to a session a few months ago, and IBM's CHRO was there, and she was talking about their artificial intelligence chatbot they called Micah inside the organization, My Career Advisor, right? And they said they've embedded her with sentiment analysis so that she can read your emotions. Apparently she's so good at it that a couple of employees asked her out. So definitely some realistic capability. So technology is evolving. Talent is evolving too, right?
Yes.
People's expectations are changing in the workplace. I saw Marcus Buckingham at that HR technology event, and he said that people who are working from home are by far the most engaged based on a recent survey that he did. And he has access to a lot of people because of his affiliation with ADP. And if you look at the number of 1099s, they've gone up 23% since the year 2000. So we're starting to see more people adopt this flexible kind of mindset when it comes to the workplace. And that's a good thing, because we're seeing also that, you know, my daughters are in school right now, and we're trying to get them ready for jobs that don't even exist yet, right? And so we need to train people to have change agility, right, and ambidexterity to be able to be successful in a wide variety of roles, not knowing what some of those roles might be.
Right. I think in addition to the people that are, you know, transitioning from a traditional workforce where they show up Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, right? I think not only are they working remote, or they're working different hours, right? They're working 4/10s, and that work week is changing. As leaders, right, we need to understand how to manage that. We're used to traditionally managing. If you go back, you know, a manager supervised a team that was on site with them, and now their teams are global and their teams are remote and might speak different languages, and you might work 8 to 5, and you're, you know, across the world, you have a team member that works, you know, 7 till 3 in the morning. So how do you deal with all those time differences, and how do you guys collaborate still as an effective team? So great book, Rework, is a great book to really understand kind of some of those dynamics, and how do we as leaders adapt to that, right? How do we allow that flexibility that's absolutely key to a productive and engaged workforce, and adapt ourselves to make sure that the team and the work output is still effective. And you'll find, I think, if you embrace it, it's actually a better work product at the end, right? You have more engaged employees that are far more excited to participate.
Agreed. Speaking of engagement, the last piece that was a real theme in the events that I attended was this notion of the employee experience, right? And I think, again, we'll try not to make too many generalizations about the generations, but the reality is the next generation does have different expectations about what the workplace is going to be like, right? They want to have transparency. They want to have some semblance of control as well. This idea of self-sovereign experiences, owning their own data. So that's a big piece of it. And then I was actually surprised to learn that benefits and how much organizations spend on benefits has gone up significantly, 19% since 2001. And you're starting to see more and more what you might call employee voice platforms that are starting to bubble to the surface, where we're trying to maintain a pulse of what's happening. And in fact, the well-being market's expected to grow to $46 billion and up in 2020. So definitely a point of emphasis to understand, how do we give people in the workplace a good experience?
Right. And I think that pendulum is influenced a lot and swinging really hard back to a consumer-driven experience, right? They have experiences at Walmart and Amazon, and they expect that now in their workplace, right? So no longer can you say, oh, here's our HR environment, and oh, benefits is, we want you to log over on this system. Oh, you want time? Okay, that's a different system. Oh, you need to submit expenses? Okay, that's a different system. This is a different system, that's a different system. And you create this choppy landscape where you expect them to go to 25 different systems, all with different passwords, not single sign-on. And you think, oh, well, that's just such a small thing. It's not, right? If you're competitive pay and such, competitive work environments, that's a differentiator, right? That they're going to perhaps choose a different employer because of the experience that you're giving them, right? You're not making it easy for them. They want an easy, consumer-driven experience at work. So it's quite different. One of the stories that I like to share is around how all this comes to play in the workforce in professions that perhaps we don't every day think of, right? Take a physician. Physicians historically do a variety of things. They serve patients, they read articles, they educate themselves, continuous education. But if a doctor read every day and all that he did was read on, say, oncology, he couldn't possibly in his lifetime consume all the information about clinical trials and all the research that's been done on oncology to bring that to bear to service a patient. So add technology into that play, right? And maybe artificial intelligence or assisted technology, if you will, helps that physician go, oh, well, based on all this data about this patient, normal course of treatment would be this, but hey, there's this weird, obscure clinical trial that this person's really a prime candidate for,
Right.
and can assist that physician, right? Not replace the physician, assist the physician in making a better diagnosis for the patient. That's where I think in the short-term future we're going to start seeing a lot of technology.
And as a patient, I want my doctor
Absolutely.
to have access to that type of information. So I like how you put that. It's assisting the doctor, not
Right.
replacing them. And I do think that's something that we need to keep in mind because there's so much fear out there right now about, am I going to lose my job in 5 years, 10 years? And a lot of this technology is going to augment our ability, not
Absolutely.
replace us. So when we start thinking about the future and the very nature of work and how it's changing how we work, where we work, when we work, who we work with, I think you're going to see a lot of changes. I do think there's potential for us to leverage new technologies. Will we leverage blockchain to find a job?
Right.
Or will that job find us based on the credentials and capabilities that we've put out there? And then when we start to look at those jobs, will we have more choices? I was talking to a client on the West Coast, and they were asking, hey, can you set it up so that when we hire somebody, they can choose how they want to be paid? And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, well, we might want some people to say, I want to be paid in all stock options and have it be really risky, but I have the potential for high reward. Or I just want a really low base salary, but I want Cadillac benefits.
Yeah.
Right? And so you're seeing more and more organizations say to people, we want to give you choices. Do you want to work from home 2 days a week? Do you want to work from the West Coast versus the East Coast? So the location, the compensation, the benefits, even what you work on. I'm seeing more and more organizations say, you know what, on Fridays, I don't want you to do your job. There's this list of projects that we have inside the organization that are reflective of some net new things we're working on. Pick whatever you want to do, but pick something, and that's what you do on Fridays.
That's awesome.
So I think those are some things that we're seeing in terms of flexibility, and then in the future, are we going to be working with cobots? Right? So side by side with robots. The very first picture I didn't mention, back to the screen that we had the agenda on, was cars. It was actually a Tesla factory. And I think it's fascinating that earlier this year when Musk was trying to roll out the Model 3, he had basically over-architected his line, and he literally had to deinstall robots from the line because he found that humans had better dexterity in doing some of the detailed work than the robots.
Yeah.
So he went too far to one extreme and tried to automate too much. And so that's where, again, I think we're going to see this delicate balance in the future of humans versus technology versus robots. You mentioned earlier the managerial role. I think a lot of the job of a manager is going to be automated.
Yep.
So think about compliance,
Right.
validating, you're taking your time off, you're clocking in, you took that sexual harassment class, you've done all the things from a compliance policy perspective. Why do we have humans doing that? Couldn't the system just track all that for us? And then what happens is a manager's role becomes relational.
Yeah.
Right?
It becomes more of a motivator perhaps than a manager, right? Managers historically used to be the people to to make sure you were grinding it out, right? And they were cracking the whip, and all that really can be tracked through data, right? We know when people log on, we know when they log off, we know what their activities are. So now the manager really becomes a motivator, right? Like you said on Fridays, hey, I don't want you to do this, I want you to do X, right? That's something that a robot doesn't really do well, right? Is that forward thinking and that emotional response. I used to say to my team, 10% of your time is reserved for me and for you, right? So for 10% of your time, we're going to brainstorm, right? And we're going to think differently, and we're going to try new things, and we're going to fail a lot, and we're going to hopefully have some fun. But I challenge you to really start thinking that way, because that's what the employees of the future that are here now, right? The millennial generation, and again, we try not to generalize, but they really expect that, right?
Yeah.
And they want that. And if you really want that engaged workforce, that's absolutely critical, is giving them that autonomy to and trusting and empowering them, right? And for the most part, it'll work. You'll have one or two that'll, fall out there, but that's really what they're looking for, to be engaged.
I agree, because they're finding more intrinsic meaning in the work that's done.
Absolutely.
So when we think about technology, I would argue the pace of change that we're experiencing today will never be this slow again. It's the hockey stick, right? An understanding. You can just see, this is actually something that we borrowed from Accenture around how they view some of these specific areas of technology, and you can see artificial intelligence and quantum computing just beginning to take off, and artificial intelligence has its own Gartner hype cycle, where you can see the progress or lack thereof in some cases of some of these areas of technology. I think one of the most fascinating things about our role, and really the profession and the discipline of HR, is how much it's changing.
Right.
And I would argue a lot of our role now is helping our senior leaders find and align people to jobs that don't exist yet, while at the same time looking for technology that, as we discussed earlier, will initially augment people, but eventually there may be some replacement of some of those folks.
Yeah.
And so it puts us in a very strange role in HR, where we're tasked with maintaining humanity while at the same time finding efficiencies that may require technology. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, right, the evolution is insane, right? If we think 10 years back, cloud was like, cloud, whatever, right? Nobody was doing it, now everyone's doing it, right? Mobile, you pretty much just used your phone, now you use your phone for work, right? If you just think about those examples and how quickly those have matured, right? And we talked about augmented technologies, those are all here now. Will we have, Star Wars and the Borg and, implanted devices? I don't know. We have Google Glass, right?
Yeah.
Isn't too far off. So absolutely. And the interesting thing about this quote really is how many times you get the HR person that says, these are the list of standard interview questions that you ask. In the webinar that we did yesterday, we talked a lot about making it personal, right? Making it human. I'm not going to ask the same interview questions for everybody who I ask. In fact, I only ask one interview question, which, we can debate whether this is effective or not. But I essentially ask people, do you game, right? And they kind of go, what? Oh, yeah, I played Call of Duty. Oh, awesome. Do you play PC or console? Oh, I play PC. Awesome. When was the last time you played until the wee hours of the morning? Oh, last Thursday I gamed till 4 in the morning and did 3 Red Bulls and went to work the next day. Awesome. What am I looking for there, right? Something different than traditionally we've looked for in the past. And that really is that quest for knowledge, right? That quest to drive to completion that will not end regardless of what the challenge is or what the problem is. Those are the differentiators and the changes I think that you're going to start to see in some of the HR practices, driven by a different workforce, right? And a different problem than we've had in the past.
Yeah, I like that question actually, and I think what you're getting at is you're starting to expose what motivates that person. I believe the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi calls that flow.
Right.
When you're so into something that 4 hours pass and you're like, oh, I forgot to eat.
Yeah.
Right? So how do we find that for people? So when we think about, again, the future, and we think about what the workforce will look like in 2030, we can prognosticate all we want. Now, we can actually use some data too. So demographic data we actually have in anticipation of how things will evolve. And so a couple things to note. And this is, the majority of this content is from a Bain report that I used to try to inform our decision making and how we look at this. So if you look at the U.S. labor force, it's going to remain low. You talked earlier about a pendulum. That pendulum has swung very much on the side of the employee today. What's the unemployment rate across the nation? It's really low, right? And that means that, and that's not going to change in the next, 10 years or so. And so we're going to have to make do with what we have. And I think there's a lot of implications there. And a lot of that's because the demographics in our country, and in many countries, we'll talk about other countries here as well, are shifting.
Yep.
So we're seeing this mass exodus of the baby boomers. They're beginning to realize it's time for me to either start to transition out of the workforce or go ahead and leave it. And that's changing what's going to happen over the next 10 years. I do think it's interesting too. You'll find over the course of the next few minutes we're going to talk a decent amount about China and India.
Yep.
And you might think that those are across the planet, they don't affect me. They absolutely affect us here in the States in a wide variety of ways. And so it's important to pay attention to some of the demographic shifts that they're experiencing as well. China's a lot more like the States in terms of what they're experiencing. India, though, is still in that growth mode back all the way into the 2030s. So.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yep. So when you look at the demographics and then you start comparing it to how people are spending money in the corporate landscape, we're anticipating over $8 trillion being spent on automation technologies, where we are taking humans out of the equation or augmenting them in terms of how work gets done. So curious to hear, what some of your thoughts are on that.
It's really interesting, right? Because being from a customer side just not too long ago, I used to get all these IT surveys, right? And one of the most common questions is, what's your IT spend and how is it trending, right? So you can go out and do the research on it, but IT spending in most industries is on a vertical climb, right? People are investing in technologies. Now, some industries are a little flatter, like healthcare, but I challenge you that spending is happening now. So if your IT department is spending part of your corporate budget, right, you as a business owner want to be engaged in that discussion and say, how is that benefiting me, right? How is it helping me manage my employees, improve my operations, better my supply chain, whatever that is, right? And the investment is happening in emerging technologies like we're talking about, right? Everyone's trying to figure out, what is RPA? How do I use that? What does it mean? And I challenge you that it means a whole lot. And it means a transformation for your enterprise if done correctly. Chatbots are becoming very commonplace. So if you're like, ooh, we don't have a chatbot, time to jumpstart that, because those conversations are happening now. Artificial intelligence, emerging automation technologies, and those could be, I just want to take a moment and talk about that. If you're still on paper, right, that's okay. It's not good, but it's okay, right? As long as you understand that you need to not be on paper. And that automation technology might be something as simple as imaging and the move towards some of these emerging technologies, right? Start where you are, just get moving.
That's right. And I think the why behind this, the reason that this is so important, is because productivity continues to decline in terms of the rate of expansion. Again, this isn't a US-centric thing. This is a global thing. And so we have to improve our productivity. And one of the ways that we will do that is through technology, is through automation. And so that's where, again, there's once again this weird balance of a lot of artificial intelligence and technology and machine learning will replace people, but we desperately need more people. And so the question is, will it even out perfectly and we'll have this great symbiotic relationship with technology in 2030? Or will we be competing with these cobots for jobs? And I don't know that we have a definitive answer, but I do think, again, productivity is really important in a variety of industries. And if you look at the different industries, that may be a little bit difficult to read here, so I'll read a couple of them that have the potential to benefit the most from productivity. Those are things like manufacturing, accommodation and food services. So think about going into a fast food or a Panera, and you can walk up to the kiosk now and say, I'm going to go ahead and enter my information and be able to order my food, and all of a sudden I didn't interact with anybody, and it's delivered right to my table. And so retail's another one, you're seeing that. And so I do think we're going to see in certain industries a much stronger impact in automation and technology than others.
Yeah, and I really challenge you as you look at this, right? So many times we see statistics and we want to conform to the statistic. We're like, oh, I got to get to 55% or whatever it is, right? I challenge you to take this and you know, yesterday I shared, right, that I'm a bit rebellious, right? I would see this and go, I'm going to do better, right? So I challenge you to really think about, regardless of what your industry is, to create more change, right? To be part of the revolution, because it's out there and it's possible today, right? Again, just get moving, do something. Your customers expect it, right? Self-checkout lines in a grocery store and retail, Target, Walmart, right? Ever go into a grocery store that doesn't have those and you got 2 items and you're like, seriously? Right? Like they're not meeting expectations around that automation technology being deployed in their experience. Same thing with employees and how we offer them, right? Take self-service from Infor. Self-service from Infor previously was, you know, kind of awkward, and now we have a really robust product, right? Get that in the hands of your employees and change how they view your ability to deliver a self-service capability to them. It'll be transformational for them.
Totally agree. And again, I think we as a society are becoming a little bit more comfortable with the idea of self-service, self-checkout, right? And so as long as the tools and the technology are intuitive and easy to use, don't require a whole lot of adaptation or training, then I think we'll see that. So, so you start to look at, again, I mentioned earlier, you know, we're looking at a global perspective here and the impact of China and India. And so one of the things I think it's important to recognize is that as those populations grow, they've also, the labor pool has gotten cheaper initially, and then it got more expensive in China and India in particular. So if you look at how they've evolved over time, they're continuing to grow in automation and investments in technology in all of these countries. And the rising wages is where it gets challenging, because right now a cobot, right, so the idea of a robot doing work is a little bit more expensive than the average Chinese worker or the average Indian worker. It's already way cheaper than all of these countries, right? And eventually that's going to drop to the point where even China and India will be more expensive to have a human being doing work. And that's why I think it's important that we recognize the impact that has potentially to have on us and our workforce.
And it really is you're going to start to see these right now. Company I used to work for, we had automated security robots in the parking lot, right? There were these big R2-D2 looking things, right? But they could call the police, they could record footage, right? They had all kinds of capabilities that a typical security guard could. So is the cost really high? Sure, in the short term, but over the life of that asset, probably less than an actual security guard, right? Robot bartenders in Vegas, if we get to go to Vegas in Forum, right? Go check out the robot bar. You can get a cocktail mixed by a robot and delivered to you by a robot. So kind of cool, really expensive, a little overpriced right now, again, to highlight that, right, the cost is not quite where it needs to be, but it's getting there. And then also, we were just at a Sheraton, and room service items were delivered by automated robots up to the rooms, right? So now room service attendants. So what I'm trying to really highlight is every aspect of society as we know it is going to be influenced and affected by the emergence of automation.
That's right. And as we've discussed, and as the media loves to play up, that will result in jobs that either are changed or eliminated. And there's a wide variety of procrastinations about what that might look like. Will we lose 40 million jobs? Will we lose 25 million? Will we lose 5 million? It's hard to discuss and debate with any degree of accuracy.
Absolutely.
But there will be an impact. There's no question about that. And so the question is, how do we address that? What industries have the potential to be the most impacted? And again, you can see where some of these industries really have the potential to use some of this technology to be more productive, to impact their margins, right? And again, at the top of the list, accommodation and food services, as well as retail, right?
Yeah, and if you're sitting there getting excited about this going, oh, this is awesome, and it's going to help us be more competitive, then pick a competitor in your industry, you're a little late to that game, right? The early adopters have already started. It's no longer a competitive advantage. Now I'd almost call it a competitive necessity, right? Like if you're not moving, 5 to 10 years from now, you're going to be in a bad spot, right? Because these other companies are moving, they are investing, like we've talked about, and you're going to struggle to get that engagement from your workforce. You're going to struggle to be competitive with higher human costs versus automation costs as those costs come down. So really the time to invest and get moving on all this is right now.
That's right, and you're seeing that investment, right? You called out a few of those examples. The grocery store, I mentioned Panera, you see it in fast food where there's potential job loss of 70% in retail in particular, right? And you can see some of the specific areas where you're going to see the majority of those losses. People tend to think healthcare is insulated from this because of the personal nature of healthcare delivery. Let me tell you, it's not. Okay? Healthcare is going to experience potential job losses as well, mostly on the administrative and back office functions. But you gave a great example of a physician being augmented earlier by technology as well.
Yeah, and it goes outside of the physician, the nurses, right? EHR we thought was going to automate so much, and we found out that really all it did is it took paper records and made them a little more accessible to folks along the service continuum there. But things are coming like automated check-in, right? You go to your physician and it's still very 1950s. You walk in, there's a little clipboard, you walk up, Michael Grace got here at 11:53, my appointment's at 12, right? And you're just like, wow, what's that about? And then they ask for your insurance card, and I'm like, it's the same insurance I gave you last time. And they're like, yeah, we need it again. And you're just like, what is going on? Like, how do you not have this? Right? And I think that experience is going to change. I worked on a project where we used a technology that you might see in an airport without naming names, where the patients can come in and they can biometrically identify at check-in, right? And then they can opt to have their insurance information and payment information stored there. So they can walk in, they can check in, lets a provider know that Michael Grace is in the lobby, sends a provider a picture of Michael Grace so he knows what I look like, automatically pays my copay, and checks me in, right? So I don't really have to do anything, bills my insurance on the back end through RPA, and then that provider walks out the door and instead of going, Michael Grace, right, walks right up to me, shakes my hand, Mr. Grace, come on back, right? Think about how transformational that experience is, and that's possible today, right? That's not futuristic Star Wars stuff. You'll see that deployed in healthcare very shortly. We had a Microsoft partner that was talking to us about the Xbox Connects, right? And how you can do physical therapy at home, and the Xbox Connect can actually watch you do your physical therapy to make sure that you lift your arms high enough. So all kinds of technology coming into healthcare in a very traditional way that providers, or we used to tell you, right, you don't feel good. I need physical therapy. That means I'm probably not in the best shape that I could be in. And then we tell you to go someplace. I don't want to leave my house. Why am I leaving my house, right? But the common course right now is leave my house and go in. If we can make people more comfortable and shelter in place in their home and where they're more comfortable and do that same type of experience, that's where I think healthcare and technology is going to really come into play. And we didn't talk really at all about wearables, right?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of a big thing, right? Predictive analytics around your smartwatches.
That's right.
That's very close to being transformational.
My watch can tell if I fall. My watch can do an EKG, right? And we're just beginning to scratch the surface there. So I sure hope that healthcare changes transformationally in the next few years a lot. Because I just got a bill the other day from one of my doctors, and it was funny, I was looking at the top, and it had a little phone icon, and then it had the phone number. And then it had this other icon, and it had a number. And I'm like, what is that? It's a fax machine. My kids would be like, what's a fax machine, right? And they're still using it. So hopefully we'll see significant change in healthcare in the next few years. Now the service sector, again, is the one where I think we're going to see the most dramatic disruption, right? And you can see the different industries over the years and the impact that technology and automation and progress have had in different industries. And as we look at this great transformation, I think the service sector in particular has real potential for disruption.
It's really interesting, right? Because it's very easy for us to say, well, we're just going to retrain those people, right? And I challenge you that that's not as easy as it says, right? If somebody who is an agricultural worker and you say, well, I don't really need that, what I really need is a computer programmer. Agricultural worker, computer programmer. That's a stretch, right? That person hasn't been like geared for that, right? Can they make that jump? I don't know. The stats say that retraining of certain industries is 0 to 15% effective. So some of your people might not be able to make that transition that we'd like to think that they're going to make, and you're going to have to plan for that, right? You're going to have to really think about what you do with your workforce. 2016 study showed that 83% of jobs under $20 an hour will be affected by some sort of technology transformation, right? Think about how many people in the U.S., in the world, make less than $20 an hour. That's a lot of people, right? 2.2 or 3.2 million bus and truck drivers could be affected by Tesla's automated self-driving truck, right? And you go, I saw that, they threw a baseball, cracked the window. That's great, but that truck, the semi version of that truck, is coming probably within 5 years. And it will start getting investment from companies, and we're going to have 2.2 to 3.2 million drivers start being affected. That's not futuristic. By 2030, that industry will absolutely be affected.
Agreed. So again, when you look at the different roles that have the potential to be affected, you mentioned a few of them.
Yep.
The folks that are making $20 and under, right? High impact. The interesting thing, though, is that the knowledge workers, the white-collar workers, have significant potential to be impacted, particularly by AI.
Yeah.
Where again, AI is actually able to replicate a lot of the functions that a human does in a lot of those roles. So we're not immune to this,
right,
if you're in, what you might refer to as a white collar role.
Yeah, we talked yesterday about the website willrobotstakemyjob.com.
That's right.
And it's more fun than science-based, again, but if you haven't gone out there, willrobotstakemyjob.com. Number one job at risk, right? Compensation managers, right? And we debated whether or not that's true, but accountants are at 94%. So why? Because it's like rule-based work, right? It's not emotional, it's not creative, right? You don't go, oh, today I like the color of Marcus's shirt, and therefore I'm going to create a GL entry for $16,000, right? It's all based on if this, then this, right? Those are the types of things that can be automated. So absolutely that white collar, right, that a lot of the areas in the ERP space are going to be affected as well.
So what's happening then is a lot of traditional roles and skills are quickly becoming obsolete. And so the implication there is, I've got two daughters, 16 and 14. When I tell them what they should study in college, apparently it's not accounting. Right? And I'm hearing more and more frequently, the best thing you can do is get a liberal arts degree, because you're going to be more well-rounded, you're going to have good critical thinking, problem solving, social communication skills. So I have a degree in psychology. I'm going to call my mom and tell her it's finally going to pay off. Because I think she was concerned about me getting that. So again, you look at, the higher income workers, the lower income workers, to your point, Michael, this is what you were talking about earlier. They stand to be more displaced than some of the others. I do think it's also interesting when you look at how work is changing and how the number of hours that we work is beginning to decline.
Right.
Okay, and this is where you start to see some of the political candidates coming up in the election talking about the idea of universal basic income, and eventually maybe there won't be enough work to go around, so we should just throw money at people. And so it's interesting to see some of these trends starting to bubble to the surface and what we could expect in the next decade.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we know work is changing, right? Hopefully nobody's debating us on that point. The futuristic look, there's a great movie called Ready Player One, right? And it's got an entire society walking around with essentially Oculus headsets, right? And they work within the Oculus environment. They're productive in there. Marketing and ads are delivered in there. So I'm not suggesting Ready Player One by 2030, but I am suggesting right, that dramatic shift in some way is coming. And people, that slogan of work-life balance that we've all been preaching, okay, here's the manifestation of work-life balance. People want more balance than they want work, right? They want work to be different. They want work to be, we talked about work-life integration, right? So careful what we ask for, right? We've been asking for it for so long, well, here it comes. And how we manage that and what tools we have to enable us to do that are now's the time.
That's right. That's right. So again, when we start thinking about what are the implications of all of this, this notion of this being a balancing act keeps, for me, bubbling to the surface. And so you think about the social elements of work, and you see the traditional and then the future orientation here. Again, there's traditionally been humans doing a lot of work, and in the future we're going to see more augmentation and in some cases replacement by machines and robots. You see historically a focus on technology and tech skills, right? Science, technology, engineering, math. Those are still very valuable, don't get me wrong, but what happens is those get obsolete in 18 months, and so your ability to have social skills may be a better point of emphasis. We see traditional roles that are full-time, and in the future, I think most work is going to be temporary in nature, which means it's going to be project-based. You talk about work-life balance versus work-life integration. I think that's changing dramatically. You talk about the fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, knowing I'm never going to be able to stop learning because my job, my company, my industry will be constantly changing and evolving. And again, the managerial style of organizations moving away from this command and control type of model to giving people independence and autonomy and saying, I trust you, Michael, to make the right decision. The whole education landscape, we could talk about that for an hour and talk about how that's becoming much less formal. People don't care if you have a degree. They want to know, do you have the skills and abilities to do this job? And so you're seeing fewer specialists out there and more generalists who can morph and have that change agility that we talked about earlier. People have historically wanted job security. That doesn't exist anymore. Right? And so a lot of millennials now want meaning in work because they know there's no such thing as security. My daughters may have 4 jobs at the same time when they're grown, and they may look back at me and go, you only had 1 job? That's crazy. How dangerous was that? So, and then we talked yesterday a little bit about this notion of the traditional career ladder is giving way to a career lattice where you're going to go sideways and up and down and backwards. So the social constructs are changing. And then the structural elements are changing as well. So we're seeing more and more, we mentioned earlier, contractors moving into roles that are temporary in nature. We're seeing people move away from the administrative and transactional functions that, for instance, the HR discipline has historically been tasked with, and automating more and more of those. We're moving from a focus on efficiency to speed. I saw Ginny Rometty, the IBM CEO, speak recently, and she's like, the competitive advantage in the future is all about speed. We're seeing less folks coming into a formal brick and mortar office and saying, I want to work from wherever, whenever. We're seeing people move away from historical constructs of annual reviews to saying we want to provide ongoing, more frequent, less formal feedback. We're moving away from hierarchical structures to more self-organizing teams. I've heard of organizations where it's totally flat. You don't have a boss. You just go pick whatever work you want to do. That's a little bit crazy, but there are folks trying that. We're moving away from formal training to constant adaptation. That's part of your job. It's in the flow of your work. You need to be learning. And we're actually moving away from jobs to saying, hey, it's not about the job that I need you to do. I'm breaking it down into tasks that I need done. Some will be done by robots. Some will be done by humans. Some will be done by other forms of technology. And again, seeing organizations realize that if they only focus on the bottom line, they're not going to get ahead. They need to look at the total wellness, the health of the workforce and the organization. And then last, you're seeing us focus from, okay, how do we focus on succession planning for our senior leadership roles to how do we give people in the organization the opportunity to move over the course of their career? So these are just a few implications. Anything in particular strike out to you?
Yeah, I wish this was like the weatherboard where I could start circling things, and so we'll put that on the request list for the next webinar series. I want a touchscreen board, right?
Yeah.
Couple things, right? Speed, and then what we alluded to a lot here is trust, right? So there's a great book, I'm a book nerd, so Speed of Trust, really talking about how do you enable your workforce? How do you begin to get to these future skills? It involves a lot of trust by the organization to your workforce, right? Which then, once you have that, really enables you to deliver and modify and change with speed, right? Because you don't have as much change management that's needed to get adoption, right? Which is another word that we talked about over here. So really, a couple other things. The workforce is going to include digital labor. It just is, right? And from a management perspective, you need to understand that. And you need to understand, how do I integrate that with my human workforce? And how do I manage, right, and maintain? Big part of digital workforce. I hear a lot of companies deploy a digital workforce and they don't really have a strategy. They kind of go, oh, robots, they're cheap, and they deploy them, and then they all break, and then their processes don't work, right? Because they didn't have a strategy on how do I integrate that into my workforce? How do I monitor and maintain that? So talk a lot about that. Some of the key things here are really, if you're still over here and you go, yeah, that's where my company is. Okay, quit whining and let's start talking about how we move you, right? Movement is key. Yesterday we talked about movement, right? And it can be small. Again, if you're on paper, great. Let's get you digitized. If you're using fax machines, healthcare, let's talk about that, right? And let's get you to e-faxes. And you're like, e-faxes is 10 years old, right? Okay, but it's a step above a fax machine, right?
Better than nothing.
And we can automate that. We can have a robot pick it up in your email and do really cool things with it. Just move, right? And if you're like, well, I'm not the leader, I'm only an accountant. Awesome. Create a movement, right? You don't have to be the CEO to start moving your organization, right? Be an influencer. Understand this, right? And you're like, well, how do I understand this? This is all overwhelming. Call Marcus. Call me, right? We'll sit on the phone with you. We'll come out and visit. And we'll help you develop strategies that move you. With Infor Technologies or not, right? Like wherever you are, we'll help you get there.
I think you made a great point. We all play a role in the future and how our organizations evolve. You do not have to be the CEO. And you know what? It's not about change management anymore.
Yeah.
We're not trying to manage change. We should be enabling change.
Yep.
We should be embracing and leaning into this change. And so I would, again, expect that you all would start thinking about what kind of role you might play. Are you going to be the change architect or at least a change leader versus a change administrator or playing no role at all? So you combine all of this. I think this last quote really kind of captures our philosophy, and that is, we believe that human potential can only be realized by optimizing how people and technology interact. And I think there's so many opportunities for us to do that in the future.